Good day everyone, Trainer Maxim with you. Thank you very much for joining me for this episode of my next podcast. I hope that your weather is as nice as mine. It's currently snowing quite badly here in Halifax. So the timing is perfect for a small talk on the difference between the direct instruction for the muscle engagement and the cue for the muscle engagement we use in our trainings. But before, I want to thank everyone who supports my channel. Thank you very much for your comments, suggestions. Thank you. Your generosity, super thanks, donations are greatly appreciated. And of course, my support angels. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Instructions and the cues, similarly so similar and yet so different. The instructions are typically represented by the direct commands on the muscle engagement. For example, during the squats, I might be asking you to rotate the thigh out or to bring the knee out, and etc. On the other hand, the cues are represented by the obscure ideas, such as I want you to think about your upper leg as a hammer, your lower leg as a nail, and when you're going up from a squat, I want you to picture that your hammer is pushed into your nail, meaning that the upper leg is pushing into the lower leg. And that cue, that obscure cue, hammer and nail, will result in a better performance of your squats. Versus implementation of the squats using the commands. Why? That's a very interesting matter. The answer lies in the inner organization of the brain. Your brain is a very complex apparatus. Your subconsciousness is capable of implementing hundreds of the commands at the same time. As I speak now, my brain is in charge of my heart rate, hormone production, and hundreds of other processes. And not only that, my brain monitors those processes at the same time and adjust those processes at the same time. Your consciousness is not capable of doing this. We can speak only one word at a time. We can think only one word at a time. We can take care typically of one, maximum 2 matters at a time, maybe 3 matters at a time. But it's impossible for our consciousness to implement hundreds of processes at the same time. So our consciousness, in a way, is a bottleneck for our subconsciousness. And that's the difference between the instructions and the cues. When you implement the instructions, it's a linear implementation of the commands, meaning step by step. It takes a lot of time and it's very long. And it's not possible to run a very complex movement in a linear fashion, because any complexity means that a lot of processes are happening at the same time. And that's where your subconsciousness has come in handy. But that subconsciousness needs the guidance on which commands to be implemented at the same time. And that guidance is the cue. So how we design the cue? First, we train all those individual processes, all the individual commands. For example, during the squats, we take care that you are capable of implementing internal rotation of the thigh, that you know what muscles are engaged and how to do that. That you're capable of implementing the toes push into the ground, you're capable of implementing the rib cage expansion, and so on and so forth. So all those components of the complex movement that squats represent must be taken care with simple drills, so that all those instructions become intuitive and automated inside your brain. Your motor cortex is well familiar how to do all those little commands. After that, we're packing those instructions into one cue. In a way, it's like designing an app. When you download an app for your phone, that app contains hundreds of instructions to be implemented by the processors of your phone. You load that app into your phone, and the phone's inner organization decides how to allocate resources and what resources to be allocated to implement all those little commands. And not only that, your phone will be in charge of adjusting those processes as they are being implemented, because some of the processes at some time must be ramped up, some processes must be slowed down, and vice versa. And it's a highly dynamic environment. So the same with our brain. Once you trained all those simple cues, all the simple commands, on how to rotate the thigh out, how to bring the knee out, you pack it into one cue. You're aware that that cue will result in the implementation of those commands, and you start using that cue for your training, for the squats or handstands or any other complex movements, so that you are unloading your consciousness from a need to monitor all those hundreds processes at the same time because it's difficult. And if you're successful, then your unloaded consciousness will be able to watch different processes, will be able to be in charge of the general direction of your performance. What sequence needs to be done next, how to switch from one position to another, or anything of the kind. So you will be aware of the environment consciously, and your subconsciousness will be tasks with implementation of those commands, running them at the same time in parallel fashion, monitoring them at the same time, and adjusting them at the same time. Because the nature of the complex movement is that even during the squats or during the handstands, the lower you go with the squats, the more knees out must be implemented. But as human beings, if you use a command, knee out, then we tend to do either 100% or nothing. So that's our perception. We always try to do everything well at 110% or don't do that at all. But often with those instructions, they must be implemented only at 75%, at that range of motion. Or the further the movement goes, the more angle needs to be increased. The more increased that angle needs to have. So it's a dynamic process. At the beginning of the movement, the angle of the knees must be 75% or 74, whatever. It's a made-up number. The lower you go, it must go to 94, never to 100. And on the way up, it needs to change in the reverse order. You possibly cannot monitor all those small changes. And that's why you train them separately. Load those all instructions into one cue and use that cue for your training and leave it to the subconsciousness to decide according to the situation how much the knees must brought out based on the weight on your shoulders, based on the environment, or based on the speed of your performance, and so on and so forth. So you possibly cannot take care of this. And that is the difference between the commands and the cues. The cues are implemented by the brain in parallel fashion at the same time, being monitored at the same time, being adjusted at the same time. The commands are implemented only once to their full extent, and they're typically abandoned after that. Once you brought the knee out, you forgot about this, you keep that knee out, and you switch to the toes pushing into the floor. And of course, you cannot go back to readjust the knees because now you have another set of 25 instructions to be done. So you keep going, leaving all those already implemented instructions behind. Versus with the cues, nothing is left behind because everything is being done in parallel fashion. So the brain keeps those, the subconsciousness of the brain keeps those threads alive all the time and monitors them at all time. And that results in better performance. But you must be aware about the commands packed into those cues. Otherwise, if you go online and you came across some very interesting cue, but you actually have no idea what it means. They did not explain it to you what should happen. So naturally, you will come up with your own interpretation. You will do your best to pack that cue with the commands familiar to your brain at that time. And you might be right. You might get 80% of the commands right, but 20% of the commands might not be right. And actually, they might be even counterproductive. They might be in the way of the right 80% of the commands. So your body will be fighting itself during the implementation of a complex movement using that unfamiliar cue, unexplained cue. And worst case scenario, you might get even hurt. We don't want it. It's very important to understand the cues. That's why I bore you during my sessions with all those tiny explanations on how the body moves, what should happen, what muscle pulls on what bone, and so on and so forth. And after we pack it into the cue, now you're aware of all the processes that cue will be resulting in. And you use that cue, loading your app, your native app, into your subconsciousness, and subconsciousness will implement those tiny instructions we have trained before, because you knew those instructions at the time you formed that cue. You're just making it more convenient. And once it's the case, your performance will be improved your consciousness will be unloaded from a need to monitor all those 2,500 thousands of instructions, and you will be able to progress and build on that cue. Further on, you can incorporate that cue into more complex cue. You can combine a couple of cues into one, so one cue will trigger many other cues, and in terms, those many other cues will trigger implementation of many other commands at the same time. And that's how we go and perform at the Olympics. I'm kidding, of course. Our goal is to be better 1% every day. We don't want to compete against anybody but ourselves, but we also want to stay not only better, but safer. So I encourage you to use the cues during your training. And in the first place, you need to understand those cues. Before you use the cues, you train all those little commands, make them automated with all those simple drills, like thigh rotation out, toes press, etc. After, those commands are very intuitive to you, very trained, they're almost automated. You pack them into the cue, and you use cues. You use that cue in your further training so that you can progress faster and build on that progress. And that is the difference between the commands and the cues. I hope you got the main idea. Please let me know what you think about this. Otherwise, go to the gym, train the commands, pack them into the cues, use the cues, and get better progress. Thank you very much for your attention. Training Maxim with me, with you, not with me, with you. I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye.